The next Steve Jobs. That's what the media described Elizabeth Holmes, who is now a convicted fraudster. Elizabeth Holmes was a young and ambitious entrepreneur who became one of the youngest self-made female billionaires in history. As the founder and former CEO of the health technology company Theranos, Elizabeth promised to revolutionize the healthcare industry with her proprietary technology that could perform a wide range of diagnostic tests using only a small amount of blood samples. Elizabeth Holmes promised the world a medical revolution. However, the company faced allegations of fraudulent practices and inaccuracy in its technology, leading to the downfall of both Theranos and Holmes. This is the story of the rise and fall of Theranos and Elizabeth Holmes. Elizabeth was born in 1984 to a rich and well-connected family, and always dreamed of being a self-made billionaire. She went to Stanford at the age of 18, where she studied chemical engineering and worked as a student researcher and laboratory assistant in the School of Engineering. This is where she had the idea to revolutionize the medical industry. Traditional industry procedure to conduct blood tests was to draw a syringe full of blood from a vein and physically send the sample to the lab and use large machines to perform the required tests, and the patient might have to wait a few days to get the result from the doctor. Elizabeth had a phobia of needles. Her vision was to simply prick your finger, and with a single drop of blood, perform hundreds of tests. The initial patented idea was to create a wearable patch, which could continually test the blood of the wearer and emit the right dose of medicine in real time. At the age of 19, Elizabeth dropped out of Stanford University to start her own business, Real-Time Cures. The company was later renamed Theranos, a combination of therapy and diagnosis. Elizabeth soon found it difficult to find investors from the medical industry. She had only spent a few semesters at university in a field that requires decades of training to master. Her lack of knowledge did not convince investors to entrust their money to her. She was a persuasive woman, and with her confidence in her vision, she managed to get funding of $6 million within a year, though most people who invested in Theranos did not have any medical background.
What do you dream for, something in 2025?
That less people have to say goodbye too soon to people they love.
Theranos promised to make blood testing simple and virtually painless, using machines that could analyze small amounts of blood. Few drops of blood is pricked from the finger and stored in a small cartridge. Then pushing this cartridge into a machine that would perform tests on the spot, and the result was sent via the internet to a lab, with personnel interpreting the results. This would make the entire process simple and much faster, completely bypassing the need for a doctor, and send the report directly to the patient. She insisted on scaling down the components of the traditional massive machines to fit into a box the size of a personal computer. Several issues made this nearly impossible. There are many components that are used to test blood, each of which performs a different type of test. The shrink-down components interfered with each other when placed in close proximity, and may cause corrupted data. The drops of blood from a single pin prick on a finger give an insufficient volume of blood samples, which had to be diluted over and over to perform multiple tests, resulting in inaccurate results. Another problem was that the composition of the blood taken from a finger prick would not have a common concentration like what would be found if taken from a vein normally, and would distort the data.
As a 19-year-old, how do you go about the process of convincing people that you know what you're doing and that you can pull it off? I think the first piece is realizing that it's not necessarily about age. And people like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and the Google guys and Michael Dell and Larry Ellison and others have demonstrated that.
Some of the experts in the field warned her that the idea was nearly impossible. Elizabeth completely ignored these warnings and began to recruit scientists to help build her vision. By 2006, they made a prototype of the machine, the Edison, but the machine was inaccurate and had extremely high error rates. After facing slow progress with the research, she demanded the work on Edison to happen 24/7. When the engineering team manager refused, she hired a second team to compete against each other, and the team which made the least progress would be fired. Meanwhile, Elizabeth began to talk to further investors as the company burned through its initial investments. She bragged about the new machine they have invented, which she claimed to work perfectly. When the investors requested to see the machine in action, she created an elaborate deception to make them think that the machine actually worked. She would conduct demonstrations for the investors, collecting their blood samples by pricking their fingers, but would ask them to go out for a meeting or lunch while the test is being done. In reality, the tests were not run by Edison, it was done by a group of scientists. It was later presented to the investors as if done by the Edison machine. Elizabeth has been outright lying to investors and clients about how well the product worked. Theranos conducted several studies in partnership with various pharmaceutical companies that brought in modest revenue. Fully knowing her technology doesn't even work, Elizabeth ran a pilot test on terminal cancer patients with the company Pfizer. Pfizer ultimately concluded that the startup wasn't worth investing in. Theranos CFO, Henry Mosley, a finance veteran, was fired from the company after he expressed concern that the company had fake test results it had shown to Novartis, the Swiss pharmaceutical giant that was thinking about becoming an investor. Theranos did not hire another financial chief after this, giving Elizabeth full unrestricted control over the financials presented to the investors. In March 2008, two high-level employees approached the board chair with evidence that Elizabeth misled the board about the effectiveness of Theranos' blood testing technology and revenue projections. The board decided to remove Holmes as CEO in favor of someone more experienced, but within 2 hours after meeting with her, she convinced them to change their minds. Less than 2 weeks later, she fired both employees who raised concerns.
You know, we are a very conservative company because we think that you should get things done before you talk about them, right? And that's the culture we have created.
Shortly after Holmes dropped out of Stanford at age 19, she began dating Theranos president and COO, Ramesh Sunny Balwani, who was 20 years her senior. The two met in Stanford's summer Mandarin program she attended before she went to college. Sunny immigrated from Pakistan and had some success in the dot-com boom of 1999, pocketing $40 million in the process. He had what she wanted, money and the status of an entrepreneur. When the board was about to fire her, Elizabeth convinced them that with Sunny's help, they would get the company back on track and rein in their shoot-up projections. Elizabeth focused on big-picture vision, while it was Sunny's job to manage the employees and business partners, despite having little experience in the field. Sunny came from a software background and had little knowledge of the inner workings of a medical company. He was said to be a bully and a tyrant for the employees and earned the nickname, the Enforcer, due to his intimidating management style. He regularly fired employees who dared to question him, and tracked his employees' whereabouts. He monitored them on CCTVs to check how long they were working, often looked through their browsing history, and even installed a keylogger on computers to track everything they typed. At the same time, the company had an insanely secretive work culture. Employees had to sign a non-disclosure agreement, which is common in research-oriented companies to protect their research from the competition. But with Theranos this was a bit extreme. Anyone who enters the Theranos building had to sign an NDA. Employees were not allowed to talk to their family about the work culture, update the links in socials, and there were even restrictions on how much employees interacted with their coworkers. Theranos simply claimed this was to protect their trade secrets, but it was to cover up the deception about the state of their technology.
There's a great Martin Luther King quote, "Take the first step in faith. You don't have to see the whole staircase. Just take the first step," right? And this is the first step.
In 2010, Theranos signed a partnership with Safeway, in which Safeway spent about $400 million. The idea behind the deal was to set up Theranos booths in their stores, where people can choose tests they require from a menu and could get the blood test done with just a prick of the finger. Customers could get tested, do their grocery shopping, and get their results and prescription filled in one stop. Elizabeth also pitched this idea to Walgreens, who paid Theranos $140 million as part of their deal. To lure investors, Elizabeth even used the Pfizer logo in reports and presentations, implying the pharmaceutical giant had validated Theranos' technology. Elizabeth expected the Edison machine to be fully working by the time they start offering Theranos blood tests in the stores. But it didn't. So the rollout of wellness centers with Safeway and Walgreens was mired by delays and distorted information sharing. Elizabeth kept trying to stall for time as the machine didn't work properly. Most functions were still not working or gave inaccurate results. Blood tests are usually critical in the medical field. Doctors use blood tests to diagnose conditions which require immediate action or to determine a patient's dosage of medication. This is something that can affect people's lives, and inaccurate results could lead to decisions that may be even fatal. Instead of waiting for their technology to catch up, Theranos pushed for public use of their devices, fully knowing it does not work perfectly as they bragged. Theranos ultimately opened more than 40 wellness centers with Walgreens in 2013. But most of the people who visited these centers were told that their requested test needs blood to be taken from their veins, in the traditional way using needles. Further, instead of testing blood on the Edison device directly, Theranos had the samples of the blood sent to its central lab for testing. And it didn't end there. Instead of using their own supposedly innovative blood testing device as they advertised, they tested these blood samples on normal commercially available lab equipment from other companies. Because of Elizabeth's insistence on using small amount of blood, few tests for which they took only a small sample of blood by pricking a finger, they modified some of the third-party laboratory machines so that they would work on diluted samples, or perform tests on their prototype machine, resulting in inaccurate results being shared to the customers. Former employees said Sunny ordered lab personnel to stop using Edison machines on any of the proficiency testing samples and report only the results from lab machines bought from other companies. Theranos advertised their machine could perform 192 different tests, but in reality, it could perform only 12 tests with a high error rate. By the end of 2014, Theranos did less than 10% of its tests on Edison machines, including tests for prostate cancer and pregnancy.
Giving people the right to obtain a laboratory test will, by definition, begin the process of enabling them to engage in their health.
Ms. Holmes, you are magnificent, and there isn't a question any of us could ever ask that you haven't answered 20 or 30 times before.
In Arizona, Theranos successfully lobbied for a law allowing laboratories to provide blood tests directly to patients without involvement by doctors, who are trained to question unusual results. Questionable test results from Theranos caused some patients to become alarmed and others to adjust the amount of medicine they were taking. Theranos was putting the life of customers at risk by sending out incorrect results. Yet they kept on advertising that everything was working fine and attracted even more investments and fame.
When people talk about glass ceilings, I always say that next to every glass ceiling there's an iron lady.
Elizabeth Holmes had an obsession with Steve Jobs. She often acted and dressed like him. She scheduled marketing meetings on Wednesdays with the same marketing company that Apple used, after finding out that Jobs did that way. She even recruited a few Apple employees, including the former senior vice president of software at Apple, Avi Tevanian. Impressed by Elizabeth Holmes' vision, he invested over $1 million and joined the Theranos board in 2006. He resigned the next year, after repeatedly being ignored by other board members when he expressed his concerns about the company's finances and progress in developing its technology at board meetings. Elizabeth had the board wrapped around her finger. All of Theranos' board members were highly accomplished individuals, but none of them had any substantial scientific or healthcare industry experience. Holmes recruited famous diplomats, statesmen, and political and military leaders with significant connections for a reason, namely to work those connections, raise funds, and gain attention. Due to the fear of missing out on the next potential big tech, everyone started to throw money into Theranos, without doing proper due diligence. The financial forecasts and company revenues shared with investors were completely fabricated and magnitudes higher than reality. Elizabeth and Sunny went to extreme steps to cover up the fact that they do not have a working technology. One such incident is when they impressed then Vice President Biden with the vision of a cutting-edge, automated laboratory. But instead of showing him the actual lab with its commercial analyzers, they gave him a tour of a completely fake, staged lab, tricking Joe Biden into endorsing Theranos and received positive press. In 2014, Theranos raised $400 million, and the company was valued at $9 billion. As a 50% owner of the company, Elizabeth Holmes' net worth became $4.5 billion. Forbes named her the world's youngest self-made female billionaire, and the next Steve Jobs. She was brought to the White House in 2015 and named a presidential ambassador for global entrepreneurship. Theranos raised about $1.3 billion in funding over the course of its history.
This is what happens when you work to change things, and first they think you're crazy, then they fight you, and then all of a sudden you change the world.
Elizabeth believed the technology would catch up eventually, and everything will be fine. But it never did. Meanwhile, she kept on advertising that they have created a revolutionary technology, and everything is working perfectly fine. Since Theranos was backed by high-profile investors, no one bothered to dig deeper and believed everything Elizabeth said. Few who raised questions were met with vague replies, and Elizabeth became extremely defensive and would change the subject. Employees were put under strict NDAs and closely monitored, and anyone they thought would expose their lies was faced with lawsuits in the name of protecting company trade secrets. In 2015, a Wall Street Journal reporter, John Carreiro, received a phone call tipping him about the concerning laboratory practices and the deception carried out by Theranos. John started to look into Theranos, tracking down ex-Theranos employees and doctors who might have used or had patients who used Theranos testing. Many of the employees were afraid to talk due to the NDAs, but few decided to share their experiences as they realized that people need to know the truth. John was able to confirm multiple incidents where test results from Theranos showed unusual results. As John started to piece the whole story together, Theranos hired private investigators to stalk ex-employees they suspected of leaking information and tried to intimidate all of John's sources he had spoken to, in order to get them to retract their statements. Even under Theranos' brutal intimidation tactics, two whistleblowers, Tyler Schultz and Erica Chung, helped John understand the dark truth of Theranos, and in October 2015 he published his article in Wall Street Journal, exposing Theranos, including how they were using mainstream commercial machines for blood tests because they do not have the technology they claim to have.
I have to say, I personally was shocked to see that the journal would publish something like this when we had sent them over 1,000 pages of documentation demonstrating that the statements in their piece were false. But we're doing things differently, and we're working to make a difference, and that means people raise questions, and that's okay. But in this case, it was pretty disappointing to see that after every single one of the sources that we spoke with, who the journal had contacted, told us that the statements that were being attributed to them were false or misleading, and the only sources who were left were ones who wouldn't speak with us, who on their own website say that they now do business with LabCorp in their office, or in the other case, demanded in writing that we pay them in cash upfront $2,500 for an hour to talk to them about their statements to the journal.
Did the journal
those
know
things
what
weren't
you just
referenced.
said? Did the journal know everything that you just said before they wrote the article?
Of course, absolutely.
Elizabeth denied everything with a straight face. She dismissed the article by saying the sources were simply disgruntled ex-employees and competitors who couldn't be trusted. Theranos even hired a reputation management firm to discreetly erase mentions of the WSJ's reporting from its Wikipedia article and other online mentions. 1 week after the journal report, she said the statements in the article are inaccurate in an interview with the Wall Street Journal. But the article was a wake-up call to the industry that blindly poured money into companies without proper due diligence. Most of Theranos' claims were never validated, raising suspicion, and critics began asking for proof that Theranos' technology works and that its results are accurate. Until then, Theranos was playing games with the FDA and the CMS, giving them insufficient reports. Within 1 month after the Wall Street Journal article, the FDA released 2 reports citing multiple concerns, including calling the company's proprietary vial an uncleared medical device. A few months after that, the CMS did a surprise inspection on a Theranos lab and reported that the facility did not meet its own quality control standards and caused immediate jeopardy to patient health and safety. Later, CMS ended up suspending Elizabeth and Sonny from owning or operating any certified clinical laboratory for 2 years and revoked the facility's certification as a clinical laboratory. The company tried to come back by focusing on miniature medical testing machines after closing its laboratory operations and laying off a high percentage of its workforce. But it never worked out. Forbes revised its estimate of Elizabeth's net worth from $4.5 billion to $0, and Sonny stepped down from his position. 2016 and 2017 saw multiple investors and partners suing Theranos one by one for lying about its technology to secure the investment. Theranos ended up voiding 2 years of results from its Edison device and providing $4.65 million in refunds. The company filed for bankruptcy, and on September 2018, Theranos ceased its operations.
Ms. Holmes, please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission charged Theranos, Elizabeth Holmes and Sunny Balwani with securities fraud for scamming more than $700 million from investors through an elaborate, years-long fraud in which they made false statements or exaggerated about the company's technology, business, and financial performance. The Department of Justice charged them with criminal fraud on the grounds that they were trying to scam investors, doctors, and patients. Elizabeth claimed she had done nothing wrong and never apologized. Meanwhile, Elizabeth broke up with Sunny and tried to blame the issues on him. In 2019, Elizabeth was spotted with her new partner, luxury hotel heir, Billy Evans. Her trial was set for July 2020, which was repeatedly delayed because of the COVID-19 pandemic and later because of her pregnancy. The trial finally started in the second half of 2021. The main focus of the trial was her intent. Did Elizabeth Holmes knowingly deceive, whether or not she had the intent to commit fraud? Former employees stated in the trial that Elizabeth knowingly covered up the fact that the machines that she was advertised didn't work. In reality, they could do only a small fraction of the tests advertised, and that too with a large rate of inaccuracies. Witness also mentioned that these devices regularly failed quality control analysis and scientists were encouraged to cherry-pick and manipulate data to make the results seem more accurate than they were. Evidence presented at the trial revealed that Holmes had distributed financial projections that Theranos' revenue for 2014 as $140 million and $990 million for 2015. While in reality, the company lost more than $500 million in 2015 while failing to generate even $1 million in revenue. Court also found that Holmes convinced investors to invest money by faking demos with exaggerated claims and adding pharmaceutical company logos on reports to make them appear legitimate. Elizabeth claimed that she is the victim of an abusive relationship with her ex-boyfriend and business partner Sunny Balwani. She said Sunny abused her, which interfered with her ability to think clearly during the time of the crimes charged. She also blamed Sunny for falsifying financial reports. She further blamed the company's board and scientific advisors for the company's fall. After years of controversy, Elizabeth Holmes was found guilty of 3 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud by lying to investors to raise money for her company. She was sentenced to 11 years and 3 months in prison with 3 years of supervised release. Sunny was convicted of 12 counts of fraud and was sentenced to 12 years and 11 months in prison and 3 years of probation. He was convicted of defrauding patients who used the blood tests, whereas Elizabeth was not.
It's finding what you love and finding what you're born to do. And when you find that, whether it's, writing or painting or science or whatever it is, when you really give everything to that, then you can realize great things.
Theranos was a hardware startup, and Elizabeth Holmes, like her idol Steve Jobs, was not an engineer by trade. However, unlike Jobs, Elizabeth never found a partner that could fill the role she needed based on her lack of technical proficiency. Theranos was trying to make too many breakthrough discoveries at once, way before the technology existed to support it. Elizabeth sold Theranos and its devices as the future of healthcare, a medical revolution. However, the trial has exposed the company for what it really was. The jurors thought Theranos' lab was poorly operated but didn't think the evidence proved Elizabeth deliberately planned to get patients to pay for flawed tests. Elizabeth, who is currently pregnant with her second child, will not begin her sentence until April 2023. As of creating this video, she has appealed her criminal fraud conviction and federal prison sentence. The trial of Elizabeth Holmes has put a spotlight on the practice where investors fight to get into hot deals and often ignoring potential red flags about the companies they are putting money into, and stands as a warning to other Silicon Valley startups that stretch the truth to score funding and business deals.